It was a night that seemed to reflect everything I felt inside. The storm had rolled in hours ago, pounding the roof and windows of my parents' house with relentless rain. Thunder rumbled like an angry warning, shaking the walls and vibrating through the floor of the basement where I lived. This space, half refuge and half reminder of failure, was my entire world these days. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd bounce back soon. But the weeks were stretching into months, and every clap of thunder felt like the clock ticking on my dignity. I had been trying to distract myself with some mindless streaming. The glow of the screen was my only light in the dim basement. Outside, the storm had taken full control, the wind screaming through the trees like it was alive. When the power went out, everything plunged into darkness so complete, it felt like the storm had swallowed me whole. My laptop screen dimmed to black, the Wi-Fi gone, and I was left with the realization that I was completely alone. I fumbled around for the flashlight I kept on the small shelf by the bed. The weak beam cut through the shadows, but it couldn't reach the corners of the room. I wasn't scared, not yet. I'd dealt with power outages before, and the storm was a good enough explanation for the blackout. Still, something about the absolute silence inside the house unsettled me. Without the hum of electricity or the soft background noise of a show, the basement felt suffocating. I lit a candle and sat near the small window that faced the backyard, trying to convince myself the storm wasn't so bad. The first sound was faint, barely audible over the rain. A dull thud, like something heavy striking the glass of the basement window. I froze, straining my ears. It could have been a tree branch blown loose by the wind, or at least that's what I told myself. But then it came again, sharper this time, deliberate. The sound wasn't random, it was intentional. My throat went dry, and I realized I was gripping the edge of the table like a lifeline. I stood and inched toward the window, holding the flashlight tightly in one hand and the candle in the other. The storm outside distorted everything, rain streaking down the glass and casting rippling shadows. Then I saw it. A pale face, pressed against the window pane, its features distorted by the glass and rain. The eyes were dark, empty, staring directly at me. I dropped the flashlight, the beam swinging wildly across the walls as it hit the floor. By the time I looked back, the face was gone, swallowed by the storm. I wanted to believe it was my imagination or some bizarre trick of the light, but my gut told me otherwise. My breath came in shallow gasps as I backed away from the window, the flickering candle casting warped shapes around the basement. I extinguished the flame, plunging myself into darkness, hoping whoever or whatever I had seen couldn't see me. Outside, the storm howled louder, drowning out everything but the pounding of my heart. I stayed frozen in the dark, every nerve in my body on edge. The storm raged on outside, but inside, it was eerily silent, too silent. I strained to hear anything over the drumming of rain on the windows, but the sound that finally reached me wasn't outside, it was above. Faint, deliberate footsteps creaked across the wooden floorboards of the main level. My heart sank. No one was supposed to be here. My parents had left days ago for a trip, and I was the only one in the house. Or at least, I thought I was. The footsteps continued, slow and measured, like whoever was upstairs wasn't in a hurry. My mind raced for explanations, but none of them felt right. This wasn't the hurried shuffle of a burglar grabbing valuables. Whoever was up there was moving with purpose. Then I heard it. A voice, low but clear, carried down to me through the vents. Ethan. My name. My blood turned to ice. They knew I was here. I clutched the flashlight, though its beam felt pathetic against the dark, and backed into the farthest corner of the basement. The air felt thick, my breathing shallow and frantic. This couldn't be random. Someone upstairs had broken into my house and they were looking for me. I thought of my phone on the table, but when I grabbed it and looked at the screen, the signal was still dead. The storm had knocked out the Wi-Fi and I was completely cut off. I felt trapped, the walls of the basement closing in on me. My only comfort was the heavy wrench I'd left near the water heater earlier that week while fixing a leak. I grabbed it, my hand trembling. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. The footsteps grew louder, moving toward the basement door. I pictured them standing there now, just beyond the thin wooden barrier, and imagined what would happen if they opened it. My breath hitched as the shadow of a figure passed under the door frame, dimly lit by the faint lightning flashing outside. I needed a plan, but the only one that came to mind was escape. The basement window was my only option. I crossed the room as silently as I could, avoiding every creak in the floor. The rain outside seemed to intensify, slamming against the glass like it was trying to warn me. With the wrench in one hand, I smashed the window, the sound deafening in the quiet of the basement. Shards of glass scattered everywhere as the cold wind and rain rushed in. For a moment, nothing else happened, but then I heard it again. A shout from above, "He's escaping!" My pulse roared in my ears as I pulled myself through the jagged frame. The glass sliced into my palms, but I didn't care. I hit the wet ground outside, the mud soft under my hands and knees. Behind me, the house loomed, its once comforting walls now a shadowy threat. I scrambled to my feet and ran, the rain pouring down so hard it felt like needles on my skin. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stop, not now. The rain stung my face as I ran, soaking through my clothes and chilling me to the bone. Each step was a struggle, my feet slipping in the mud and my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I didn't dare look back. The shouts from the house were drowned out by the storm, but I could feel them behind me, those voices chasing me through the darkness. The wind roared in my ears, whipping branches and leaves against me as I stumbled forward, blind and desperate. The backyard seemed endless, every step sinking me deeper into the muck. I tripped over something, a tree root maybe, and landed hard on my side, the impact jolting the air from my lungs. For a moment, I lay there, gasping and shivering, but the fear driving me was stronger than the pain. I pushed myself up, ignoring the sharp ache in my ribs and the wet sting of blood on my palms, and kept moving. The only thought in my mind was escape. Ahead, through the sheets of rain, I spotted a faint light. It was far, maybe at the end of the block, but it was the only sign of life in the suffocating darkness. The thought of reaching someone, anyone, gave me a shred of hope. I forced my legs to keep going, the mud clinging to my shoes and pulling at me like hands trying to drag me back. Each step was agony, but I didn't stop, not even when my legs screamed for rest. By the time I reached the house with the light, I was half drenched in mud and shaking so badly I could barely stand. I pounded on the front door, the sound weak against the howling wind. "Help!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Please, someone's after me." The house seemed to stare back at me, silent and unmoved. I knocked again, harder this time, but there was no answer. The light inside flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw a shadow move behind the curtain. Then it was gone. My stomach sank. Whoever was inside either couldn't hear me or didn't want to. I turned away, wiping the rain from my eyes, and staggered back into the storm. I needed to hide, to find somewhere I could gather myself and call for help. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my hands slick with rain and blood, and tried again. This time, the call connected. Relief washed over me as I heard the voice on the other end, calm and steady, asking for my location. I stammered out the address before the line cut off. I crouched behind a hedge near the house, my chest heaving as I struggled to catch my breath. The rain masked everything. The sound of my pursuers, the hum of the neighborhood, even my own thoughts. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, cold and trembling, for the police to arrive. When the flashing lights finally appeared in the distance, I let out a shaky breath. I stepped out of the shadows, waving my arms to flag them down. Relief surged through me, but it was quickly replaced by dread as I realized this wasn't over. Not yet. The officers searched the house thoroughly, their flashlights cutting through the storm as they checked every room. They found no one. The intruders were gone, leaving behind only chaos, a ransacked living room, overturned furniture, and the shattered window in the basement. One officer asked me questions, his tone calm but skeptical. I told him everything: the face in the window, the footsteps, the voices. He nodded but said little, his expression unreadable. As they packed up and left, I was left standing in the yard, drenched and shaking, wondering if they had ever been there at all. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the broken basement window, its warmth mocking the cold terror that still gripped me. The storm was gone, leaving the house eerily quiet, as if it had absorbed the chaos from the night before. My parents returned that afternoon, their expressions shifting from worry to fury as they surveyed the damage. Broken glass, overturned furniture, muddy footprints. They took it all in with tight lips and narrowed eyes. "We leave for one weekend and this happens?" my father said, his voice sharp. "What were you doing, Ethan? How did you let this happen?" I opened my mouth to explain, to tell them about the intruders and how they knew my name, but the words caught in my throat. My mother shook her head, muttering something under her breath about responsibility and wasted chances. I tried to defend myself, to explain how the power outage had trapped me and how I'd barely escaped with my life. But every word felt flimsy under their skeptical stares. "They knew who I was," I said, my voice breaking. "They called me by name. This wasn't random." My father dismissed it with a wave of his hand, saying I was imagining things. "You probably left the door unlocked," he added, his tone more accusatory than concerned. The police report didn't help. The officers had found no fingerprints, no definitive evidence of who had been in the house or how they'd gotten in. The storm had wiped away any tracks outside, and the intruders had left behind nothing but destruction and questions. The lack of answers only deepened my parents' disbelief. To them, it was my fault. The ransacked house, the broken window, even the fear etched into my mind. For days, I barely left the basement. Every creak of the house set my nerves on edge. Every shadow near the broken window sent my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that they would come back, those faceless intruders who had invaded my home and my mind. I replayed the night over and over, searching for any clue that might explain why they had come for me. Was it something I had done? A mistake from my past? Or was it something worse? Something I didn't even know about yet. Weeks passed, but the fear stayed with me, like a scar that refused to heal. My parents talked about replacing the window and upgrading the locks, but their words felt hollow. I knew it wasn't the house they had targeted, it was me. Whoever they were, they had known where I was and what I meant to find safety in. That knowledge haunted me more than anything else. In the end, I packed what little I had and left. Staying in that basement, in that house, wasn't an option anymore. The memories were too raw, the fear too fresh. As I walked away, I told myself I was starting over, that I'd rebuild my life somewhere far away from the shadows of my failure and fear. But even as I turned the corner, leaving my childhood home behind, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. half expecting to see those faces again, watching, waiting.